Today's video, we're looking at the OnePlus 13, answering the question, should you buy this phone in 2026? And my answer would be yes. That's the end of the video. Just kidding. Obviously, there's still more time. Stick around to get the full breakdown, reason as to why I still recommend this device. Disclaimer though, before we get into all that, no sponsorships are involved in this video. And if you don't believe me, I take it a step further by showing you a receipt. Not sure how many people are doing this, but I like to do that because all my opinions are transparent and honest. As you can see, purchased on Facebook Marketplace for $230, and that's a pretty good deal. Only reason because it had some cosmetic issues. Not a deal breaker for me. If you're looking for this phone used, it's around, maybe if you're lucky, 500 to maybe like 700 in the used markets. However, disclaimer with that, when you are buying secondhand, swap eBay, Facebook, all those other markets, just make sure you vet your buyer, meaning select a buyer who has high rates, a lot of comments. If there's someone that doesn't have much ratings, no comments, maybe the deal's too good to be true, and I would highly recommend you do not buy unless you want to get something that may have problems. Now, let's talk about the full review. Why is this phone still a good phone to purchase in 2026, that is? Well, it released in 2025. It's only about a year and some months old, and obviously you can get the phone on discount. And more importantly though, I think that it's still a great phone, and to rank that, I would look across the most important categories. Those being the updates, the chipset, the battery, the camera, long-term usage reliability, lifespan durability, and features. Now folks, I could choose so many other categories, but I've only selected those because I think those are the most important. I could talk about the design, I could talk about the charge speed, I could talk about the haptics and the audio and the speakers, but at that point some of that stuff is getting a little bit subjective. Maybe you do care about those things more than others, but I'm only focusing on the most important ones because at the flagship level, all across the board, these things kind of start to get a little bit just overall pretty good. But over these most important categories, that's up for debate. Now, let's talk about the 2025 phones that were in the conversation. Now, on Oppo side, you have the Oppo Find X8 Ultra. On the Google side, you have the Pixel 9 Pro XL. Samsung, you have the S25 Ultra. The OnePlus, you have the OnePlus 13. The Vivo, you have the Vivo X200 Ultra. The Xiaomi, you have the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. And when we look at the release date schedule, the OnePlus actually released around the beginning of the year. And when we look at that, we may think, oh wow, this is probably not the best one because, this is the earliest, and so later in the year the better stuff is coming out. Maybe or maybe not, that's up for debate, but I'm going to give you the rankings so that you can see where I think this phone actually lines up. Looking at the screen size, not rating this one, just giving you guys kind of a visual here just so you can see. At the flagship level, a lot of these phones are kind of getting big now. We're not really seeing anything lower than 6 points in this. It's always 6 point something, and the OnePlus is at 6.82. My opinion, honestly, I love and hate the design. I mean, the size is not a big issue for me. All these phones, I've held the Pixel, the Samsung, the OnePlus. I have a Vivo. This is the X100 Ultra. I did have the 200 and I used it for some time, but I don't have that one. The screen size is not a bother for me, but when we talk about design, I do like the way this is centered. I think it's a little bit less usual, the norm than what Samsung does. In my opinion, Samsung has gotten stagnant and they kind of reuse the same thing. So I do like the OnePlus 13 design in my opinion. What I do not like is their, opt for a curved screen. And that introduces some maybe issues which we'll talk about later. But anyways, that is what we have with screen size and design. But let's talk about categories that are most important, starting with the first one, the updates. So when we look at the chart, and I'm going to be bringing these charts in and out as I'm talking throughout the video, the OnePlus isn't the one with the highest. Now, in this lineup, there's 6 phones, so the point system works this way. 1 means you have the least ranked in this category, and 6 meaning you have the most. So OnePlus, it doesn't have the most, but I would actually give it 4 points in terms of updates. And you might be wondering, how am I ranking this category? Well, when we look at updates, you might think bigger number means a better result, but as a customer, that would be not looking at the full picture. And that's because when we talk about updates, a lot of these phones maybe have longer support, but what really comes from that support may be not as what you think. Looking at the Pixel, I find that the Pixels have given you a longer usage of OS and security updates, but most of their stuff is just interface changes and cleaning up things. They give you a lot of AI features that a lot of people aren't really talking about lately. Most people are talking about their older stuff, and that's why even something with the Pixel having 7 years is only getting 3 points. Now, I will give credit where credit is due, and now the Samsung matches the Pixel with 7 OS and security updates, but the difference is Samsung actually delivers. One UI is full-fledged packed. I have used Samsungs in the past, and as much as now I am a OnePlus user, right now I'm using an Open, I will give credit in saying that Samsung's One UI is still the king in Android space because there's so much that you can do in it as a Samsung user, and you can't do across these other brands. There's the customization of just the widgets stacking. They're like trending and giving you features that then other phones adopt. You can even get another app called Good Lock and expand that. If you want the full all that, go to look at my S25 Ultra video. I say more there. But the reason why the OnePlus is getting 4 points, in my opinion, is only because, it's the model that we get in North America from BBK. BBK releases Oppo devices and OnePlus. Now, if we had Oppo devices in North America, then yes, this would be a different conversation because the OnePlus, tends to be the one that isn't as the one that's refined as much as the Oppo, but OnePlus is what we have. OnePlus updates are maybe not as exciting, even in my opinion. They have introduced a lot of AI into the updates. If you like that sort of thing for basic things like AI editor, they have like their own type of essential space, which they call like Mindspace, if I'm not mistaken. And it's a pretty good experience. And now, if you look at mine and you're saying, oh, yours is still like on Oxygen OS 15. Yes, I've left it there because I'm going to do some other something else with my phone, which I'll talk about at the end. But I have used OnePlus AI on the OnePlus Open. I've actually had this phone multiple times and sold it, but this is the more recent one that I have. The device is pretty good, guys. Like the updates, you may not think it's as much as what Samsung delivers, and that's great, but it ages so well. OnePlus devices, I swear, their phones, the way the update configures the OS is just a great experience. I don't find that it lags. Unlike the Pixel phones and even the Samsung phones, after about a year or two, there's a bit of a lag and the battery starts taking a hit. And that's why, even though I'm not getting 7 years of updates with OnePlus, I still think it's not the worst, but it's still pretty good. Now, on the Vivo side, it's pretty lame. You don't get a lot of features, and that's why I have it at 2. It is not that badly optimized, but the last place is the Xiaomi because unfortunately, it's just not much talk there. And even with updates, that battery takes a big hit. You're going to be hearing that a lot in this video for the Xiaomi. Now, next category to rank is the chipset. So across all these, you'll see that most of them opt for the Snapdragon 8 Elite, with the exception of the Pixel. The Pixel, obviously, it's using its own Tensor chip. And this one, the G4, is equivalent to a Snapdragon 8 Gen 3. What the hell does that mean? Look, guys, if you are for performance, yes, Snapdragon is going to be the king. MediaTek tends to be the more conservative in terms of performance, opting for more battery preservation. But we don't have any MediaTek in this conversation. So where does that leave us looking at the points? So I'm giving 6 points to the OnePlus in the chipset. And that's just because I find that with its OS, it tends to be well optimized. Now, I believe the Snapdragon on the 8 on the Samsung is overclocked for just a little bit more, but in my opinion, I feel like the performance that I get on the OnePlus, it just doesn't do much overheating like these other phones. And again, it's pretty well optimized for Oxygen OS. The Tensor obviously has the least performing chip. A lot of people like to talk about the Tensor not, the Pixels not needing a lot of chip power, but to be honest, guys, the Pixel price is flagship price, and if I'm gonna pay flagship, why would I not want like the best performance? It just doesn't make sense to me. I can understand, even I myself as a user who's not a gamer, I don't need the highest performance, but I definitely want an optimal chip for at least my phone not overheating. And that's where the Pixel chipset is taking a bit of a hit, because even during normal things over time, it can just overheat just a little bit more than these other phones. It has been fixed a little bit more compared to the past series, but just knowing Pixel, the batteries are always having some type of an issue in overheating over time. Now, that leads segue to the next one category, battery. So with the battery, this one's going to be a little bit easier to rank, because sometimes, yeah, big number is easily the easiest way to rank the battery, meaning the more battery you have, the better lifespan it's going to be. There is that conversation of, though, how is the battery calibrated? Looking at the points though now, we see that the OnePlus, I have it at 6 points. Now, 6 points for the OnePlus because I find that the battery on the OnePlus is still not the highest compared to the Oppo, but the OnePlus experience is pretty good in not degrading your battery. And if you don't believe me, let me show you, because over to the side here, I have my OnePlus open, and this phone still has about 2 years of support. Let's go down to the battery health, and it's still at 95%. Now, I can't say that would be the same for across these other phones. For the Oppo, yes, but the Oppo is hard to get here in North America. But across the Google and the Samsung, after about a year, those batteries just take a hit. So yes, big number can always maybe be good, but really software too really matters here, because when we look at the Xiaomi, it has a little bit more battery milliamps than the Google, but I even would rank the Google better battery than the Xiaomi, and that's because the Xiaomi software just kills it. And I find that in the span of time, the battery health really takes a big hit with really, really bad software. So 6 points to the OnePlus there. Now, next one would be camera. Camera is going to be a very subjective one, because you may or may not like certain things, but ranking this the best way that I can, just from using the ones that I have in personal experience. Now, when I talk about camera, I'm talking about the full package, not just the freaking pictures, and I'm talking about the videos too. And that's why I'm giving 6 points to the Vivo. Now, I really like the OnePlus. I love what OnePlus does and Oppo, but I honestly love Vivo so much that that's why I have one, just simply for the camera. I don't even have this thing on Wi-Fi. It's literally just point and shoot. This is my go-to camera because I don't want to do a lot of editing, and I like the way it does the processing. Vivo, guys, is highly acclaimed around being the best camera, and that's because it not only has good videos and it has good pictures, but it's able to give you this almost like DSLR quality in the pictures. A lot of people are gonna, say that this Pixel are the best cameras, but they always leave out that the video takes a hit. And bah. But where does OnePlus stand, in the camera? Now, I wouldn't rate it as the highest, and I know on the scale it too looks like it's really down there. But the only reason why I give it a 2 is because, Oppo does so much better. Both Oppo and OnePlus, Hasselblad partnership there. The Oppo cameras tend to be the better refined ones. And even the 3, I gave it to the Pixel, because I find that the regular customer is going to like the consistency of that camera, even with the not so good video. But in my opinion, I would still rank this at 2, and a really good camera. And if you don't believe me, look, the camera can be a little bit inconsistent. Sometimes the post-processing maybe makes you look a little lighter. Sometimes things blow up in a way that aren't really true to the moment. But I think it does a pretty good job. And even though, it's not coming in high, I would still really recommend the camera on this one. I find myself in my trips, I use the OnePlus Open here, and it's a pretty good camera, and I'm very satisfied. But enough about this one. Let me show you some examples of how the camera performs. pictures, qualities, and then we'll resume the video. So when we go to the rear camera, you have a lot of options to choose. You can go 720p, 1080p, 4K, or 8K. Right now what you're seeing is 4K, 30 frames per second, HDR enabled. In my opinion, I think the 4K level is where you're going to want to be at. Let's go and see what some zoom looks like. So we see when you do 2 to 3, there is a little shift in transition in colors. Not too major, but there is a little shift there. Now here we're looking at 4K 60 frames per second, still HDR enabled. However, I, in my opinion, think this is the best option, even though it can go to 8K, which you'll see in a bit. This is the most stable while also retaining the most quality. Again, slight shift in colors there, but I think if you have good lighting conditions, this is probably the option you want to choose. Obviously, higher quality, more storage, but this is really good. And now when we go 8K, it's really locked. And this is why I don't like this one, because it only can be done at 30 frames per second. HDR enable is not an option. On top of that, you can't even zoom. There's no zoom, so you're still at the 1x. A lot of processing is going to be needed for this. It's also just really laggy as I'm shifting the phone. So definitely not a go-to option in my opinion. Alright, so front selfie, OnePlus 13. Right now it's at 4K 30 frames per second with HDR enabled. And here's what it looks like with the front selfie. It's about 8:30. Your options are, you can also set at 720, 1080, the 4K again, 30 frames or 60 frames per second. And if you're going for, you know, shots with these kind of conditions, a lot of light, this is kind of the experience you get. You know, those lower options are kind of not, you know, useful. So definitely probably want to go on the higher end if you have better light, then reduce down to 1080p if you have to when you have less light. So let's see what's next. Now here we're at 60 frames per second, and I do love this much more than 30 frames. As you see, I'm going left to right, and it's just an awesome transition, still retaining a lot of quality. This is probably your go-to option that you want. I mean, you got a flagship, right? If you have a lot of light, this is what you're probably going to want to use. However, again, if you have to reduce because of lighting conditions, maybe start at the 30 frames per second at the 4K and then go down to the 1080p. So it's 8:32. This is 4K HDR enabled, 30 frames per second. So when you try to get this kind of quality at 30 frames per second, it's doing pretty good getting quality in here. I will say it's not as true to the moment. It's bringing things a lot more light into the shot than compared. It's actually much darker than this, but it's still doing a pretty good job. Now if you go zooming in, we'll see some reduction in quality there. At 3x, this is a little bit more true to what it looks like right now. But yeah, 8:33, 4K 60 frames per second, HDR enabled. Quality has now been kind of reduced a little bit more. And what I mean is there's a little less light capture. 30 frames per second was adding a little bit more light to the shot, but now this is a little bit more true to the moment. However, when there's more you know, interference, when it's less light, you're going to want to bump down so that you can get more in your shots. And now I'm going to go to the highest setting, 8K, 30 frames per second, and you'll see that it's going to do a horrible job. And again, look at the time, 8:34. So you're going to see that it's going to be much darker than what it really is at 8K. At 8K, 30 frames per second, it's having a bit of an issue, you know, with the focusing. Things are starting to go in, and now it's not as stable as what it was with the 4K 60 frames per second. Like right here, it's going great, but it's a little bit fuzzy and grainy, and because it's 3 frames, it's not doing that great. This is where, even though you can do the highest quality, it's probably not going to be the best to do it in darker conditions, because it's going to have a difficulty keeping the shot in, you know, in the moment. Like I can't get good focus on there. This is somewhat good, but it was a lot more clear than in the 4K settings. Yeah. So here's 4K 60 frames per second. Right now the viewfinder, it doesn't really look that great, but once it processes, we'll see how that changes. I'm showing some jittering as I'm moving. I typically don't get that when it's a little bit lighter, but yeah, it's a bit stutters. Now let's try doing 4K 30 frames per second. In the viewfinder, I'm looking, can't really even make out much of myself, but we'll see what it looks like after processing. So if we're trying to do 1080p 30 frames per second, this is what it looks like. Now let's try doing 1080 60. Looking at 1080 60, let's see what it looks like after processing. It looks a bit close to 4K 30, but we'll see. And now that we're done with that, let's look on to the next category, long-term usage reliability. For this one, we have OnePlus at 6 points. And when we're talking about long-term usage reliability, what I mean is, can you actually use this phone as a daily driver in the span of its lifetime? And this one, I will say, can be debated, because all it's going to depend on, like, you know, how you care for the phone. But what I'm saying is, are the updates gonna make this phone like something you can use long term? Which is why I put 6. I think that Oxygen OS is pretty good amongst all of these other ones. Like, as much as Samsung gives you in features, I've found, you know, again, 95%, and it's still almost just 2 years left, they're aged really well. I can highly rely on OnePlus devices. Now, accessories and all these other things about like, care, that's going to be answered in the next category, lifespan durability. So how does the warranty hold up? How would you deal with repairs if necessary? Accessories. This is a different conversation, and that's why we're seeing the OnePlus is at 4. Yes, this phone I would say has really good reliability because of its optimized software, but durability, very different story. Again, phone is curved screen, meaning the protecting is going to be very different. The best case I could recommend for this, if you want true protection, is a Poetic brand. They have like a full like shockproof armored case. It's going to give you a lot of bulk, but it's at least going to give you the full coverage. Now, these other phones just have better durability, and I'll honestly own up to that. Like the Samsung is the most popular one in North America. You can easily take that at Best Buy. You can send it off into Samsung, mobile, and it's just a better experience. And unfortunately, at the time of this recording, OnePlus operations are, ending in North America. So this is going to be even more difficult. I mean, you might be able to repair it secondhand shops, which is why I still give this a 4. And these other Chinese brands, are effectively not as high, but it is going to be difficult. Oppo, we don't know how you're going to get the parts here. And then anything like the Vivo or the Xiaomi, they're not popular in North America. They're just going to be very difficult. But yeah, durability in this one is not as high. And then lastly, features. What can I say about the features? Well, on the OnePlus side, as much as I've been raving about the phone, I'm actually going to give it a 3. And that is because I just, again, have mentioned earlier, the feature side goes to the Samsung. The One UI software gives you so much features to customizing, your lock screen, you can customize avatars, you can do like a much better desktop mode. I can go on, but go ahead and watch the S25 Ultra video if you want all that. Whereas where I have to rank the OnePlus with 3 points is that it's not the most exciting stuff that you get, if I'm going to be quite honest. But I do think their feature is their software and how optimized it is. People will say that the OnePlus has lost its identity with where it's at now, that it looks so much like an iPhone clone. But outside of it looking like a clone, it's so smooth in how it just navigates. And also I find that, again, the battery is just something that ages well. And if you're not, a person that cares about customizing so much and you just want a pretty good camera and just something that you feel that's going to last you a long time, this is a pretty good phone. Now, with that, the final verdict. Where does the OnePlus rank? And we see that it ranks at 31 points, second place, and even the Oppo ranked at 31 points. Then there's no surprise there because they're essentially the identical, phones that BBK releases, just one being more refined, that being the Oppo. But that's not to say that the OnePlus is not a bad option. So last final comments that I have to say, if you enjoyed the video, obviously like, comment, subscribe. It's really difficult when I get these phones because I use my own funds, and your engagement, helps in me, paying it forward and, keeping this kind of conversation and format going. Now, the reason why, little bonus, the reason why you see my phone is on Oxygen OS 5 is because, again, 15 that is I've had this phone, I bought it, I've sold it. This latest one, I'm keeping finally. And the reason why I'm keeping it at Oxygen OS 15 is because I plan to root the phone. I'm going to be rooting it with Lineage OS. And if you're not familiar with rooting, like, comment, and subscribe, because I will be dropping a lot of content of what the rooting looks like, but not just how to root, but how this phone will be after rooting. So, yeah, enjoy.
Ay, ay, ay!